Today, we are going to be going over our third writing advice stream. Oh my god, we're already at number 3. Wow. I need to use the washroom. Can I have a hall pass? Just do it in a cup or something. I'm busy. I'm busy teaching the class. You can't interrupt. Today's lesson is about a multitude of topics, really. We are going over tropes, cliches, archetypes, and stereotypes. So let's start with some definitions of what makes a trope, a cliche, an archetype, and a stereotype. A trope is a figurative or metaphorical use of a word or expression. That's the basic definition. Weirdly enough, tropes are like a big category, and subcategories include things like similes and metaphors, like figures of speech and stuff like that. Those are considered tropes, and we already kind of went over those in our first lesson of analogies. But specifically what I'm talking about here is the more recent definition of a trope, which is conventions of literary genres. And we'll go over a bit more in detail with all of these later down the line. Cliches are a phrase or opinion that is overused or lacks original thought. I'm pretty sure you can think of a bunch of cliches off the top of your head, like something being old hat, or, why can't I think of any other examples? What the heck? Why can't I think of other examples of cliches? Cliches are like, they're everywhere. How can I not think of examples? Archetype, not archetype, archetypes are a recurring symbol / motif in literature, art, or mythology, which again, we are going to go over more specific examples later on down the line. And finally, we have stereotypes, which are a widely held but oversimplified image / idea of a type of person or thing. First, we're going to have to go over tropes. So let's do that. Like I said earlier, the first definition is like similes, it's metaphors, it's allegories, etc. It's different figures of speech that use metaphorical language, not literal language, in order to convey an idea of some kind. But we are specifically looking at narrative tropes. And narrative tropes are common themes or characters or plot devices in a given genre. If you think of mystery novels or like film noir, things like that, you think of femme fatales, you think of rough, rugged, private eyes and things like that. You think of dark alleyways and suspicious dealers of knowledge, things like that. Like they got info, they got intel, they're gonna cost you, stuff like that. You think of very dimly lit streets and rainy nights. Why was I saying rainy nights? What? It also can be like plot devices. Like in westerns, you have bar fights or sunset shootouts and showdowns and things like that. Tropes on their own are not actually that bad. When people hear the word trope, they kind of like basically use it as a synonym. They think it's synonymous with the word cliche. But as we can see, cliches are actually a little bit different. Cliches are the craft glitter of the literary world. Writers may think it's flashy and cool, but in reality, it's painfully prominent, annoying, and everywhere. Basically, what you need to know about cliches is cliches are tropes that are just completely overdone, and they lack any form of originality. So like right here, I used Princess Peach as an example, because Princess Peach is a very classic, especially the early iterations of Princess Peach. She's a very classic iteration of the damsel in distress cliche, or you could say the damsel in distress character trope. Now, here's the thing about Princess Peach in particular. Her image has changed over the years. So, whereas early iterations of her from basically the 80s and 90s, whereas those were like, oh no, please save me, Mario, more recently she's taking a more prominent role. Cliches are basically tropes that are done, like nothing is new is done with them. You take a trope and you just slap it, copy paste it into a book or a poem or something like that, and you just call it a day, and that turns it into a cliche. Here's how you can tell a distinction between a trope and a cliche. Tropes are commonplace, but writers are not obligated to follow them to the letter. In fact, going against what's expected is oftentimes just as effective and evocative, if not more so. So in a romance, let's say, they go to a park and they sit under a tree and like there's a flower petal or something that like flows on the wind and then like gets put in one of the people's hair, and it's like, oh, it's such a sweet romantic scene and stuff like that. Now imagine instead that person is secretly allergic to that flower. That completely changes the entire scene, does it not? Because that lands in their hair, and then bam, they break out in hives. And it's like, oh crap, we have to deal with that now. And that is a subversion of the trope. Because instead of doing something that's all romantic and stuff like that, what's expected from the context, instead we get a completely different scene. It's like, oh, that's very intriguing. That engages the reader a lot more. So you get something that's more interesting, you get something that's more evocative, and you maintain the attention of your reader so that they want to read more of your story. Like, it's okay to have tropes. It's okay to have a framework, a basis to build off of. But if you don't do anything interesting, if you lack originality for your story, I'm going to make that distinction for a reason. If you lack originality for your story, you run the risk of losing the reader's attention or interest. Now, the reason I say specifically for your story, it is very disheartening to a lot of people whenever you hear the words lacking originality. Because look at how long of a history the written word has, just like in general. We are in the year 2024, and like, I don't even know. Let me look up a quick thing. First written words. This is according to the first Google search, Babbel.com. General consensus is that Sumerian was the first written language developed in southern Mesopotamia around 3400 or 3500 BCE. So that means that the written language is almost 5,000 years old. No, it's over 5,000 years old. The fact is, you're not going to have a lot of things that are original ideas anymore because we've just been around for so long. But a lot of people hear that and they think, oh, there's no way that I can be like clever and original with my work. That's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true because the fact is you are your own individual, which means that you experience the world in your own individual way. And the things that you write are going to be yours. And how you distinguish yourself from other writers, that's completely up to you. I wouldn't necessarily say that just because you do a trope a certain way and you try to subvert it in a certain way, that doesn't mean that you're lacking in originality if somebody else did it. Because, again, you're just building it off of your own context clues, your own experiences. I would say the most important thing when it comes to avoiding cliches, if you take what's expected and try to do something a little different with it, even if somebody else has already done that same thing, as long as you're still adding your own special sort of nuance to it, I think you're set. I think you're good to go. So here are some good examples of subversion. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's a very famous Shakespearean sonnet, and the question makes it seem like, oh, I'm gonna get told just like all the amazing ways that I'm like a summer's day, because like, oh, I'm hot, and things like that. But no, Shakespeare poses it as a question, as in, do I really want to compare you to a summer's day? Because, and then it goes like, thou art more lovely and more temperate, and that's like saying, summer days are way too hot. I don't like summer days, but I like you because you're more mild-mannered and pleasant. I like being around you, things like that. So in that way, the subversion comes from just doing the complete opposite of what is expected. And that is a very, very good way to subvert expectations if you don't know necessarily how, or you don't know how to incorporate a twist in your own work. Just do the opposite of whatever's expected. So like, let's go back to the damsel in distress option, where the trope is like, oh, the hero comes and rescues the princess. You could say that, the villain stops the hero and the princess stays captured. Or maybe the hero turns out to be the real villain and then the villain rescues the princess. Or the princess rescues the hero because the hero gets captured. There's a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do with that trope. And all of it is a subversion of expectation because it's just flipping the script. That's all it is. Next up, we got archetypes. Archetypes are meant to convey relatability and realism. The reason they recur so often is because it familiarizes ourselves with the concepts. So if anyone has ever taken a psychology course or has maybe dabbled in psychology at all, you might know the name Carl Jung. He is a cognitive psychologist, I believe. And he came up with a list of 12 archetypes that are based off of different aspects of just humanity in general. So the 12 archetypes we have are the hero, the magician, the outlaw, the explorer, the sage, the innocent, the artist, the ruler, the caregiver, the everyman, the jester, and the lover. All of these have their own different concepts tied to them, all their different tropes and cliches and things like that. Things to be expected of them as characters. Like, you can have multiple people fitting in the same archetype, because archetypes are a more overarching term. Or you could call them archetypes in that case. Anyway, we have this example over here of different characters from The Breakfast Club. And the reason I use them is because they are very good examples of different character tropes. We all know these different, we've got the punk, we've got the jock, we've got the like outcast weirdo, we've got the preppy girl, and we've got the nerd. Now, all of these, you can argue, fall into different archetypes. Like, maybe the jock is more so seen as the hero because of, like, that's just basically they give off protagonist energy to a lot of people. Whereas this guy might be like the jester because he's the class clown. This person's the artist because that's what they focus on. Things like that. Those are archetypes, but they have their own tropes inside of them. Archetypes can also refer to like certain story themes, like rags to riches. That's a very, very common archetype. Or different symbols, like trees and nature representing life in general. Those are also considered archetypes. However, we then move on to stereotypes. Now, what are stereotypes, you might ask? Well, stereotypes are generally very harmful, not only to one's writing, but to the general public and their understanding / view of certain people as well. Do not put it past yourself to say like, oh, people are smarter than that. People will know that if I put some stereotypical things in here that it's not necessarily indicative of how people are in real life. No, you'd be surprised. Because if they read something and they think, oh wow, that's how it is, then they will just take that to heart, and there you go. Now you're responsible for racism. Congratulations. But not necessarily. That was a joke. Stereotypes disregard the complex nature of humanity and reduce characters to basic / static personalities. A very good example of this is SpongeBob that I use up here. If anyone remembers the episode Squirrel Jokes, where SpongeBob makes a bunch of jokes about squirrels being so dumb, like they don't know how to change a light bulb and things like that. And then everyone starts treating Sandy, the only squirrel in Bikini Bottom, they start treating her differently because they think, oh yes, all the squirrels are dumb and things like that. And then she puts on this caricature, basically, to kind of prove SpongeBob wrong, because SpongeBob knows that she's not like that, so why is he making jokes about it? You need to be very, very careful when it comes to how you typecast your characters. Basically, you want to avoid stereotyping your characters at all costs. Please. How do we differentiate between archetypes and stereotypes? While archetypes and character tropes can provide an understanding or purpose for a character, stereotypes are one note and do almost nothing to elevate a story. Like I said before, archetypes are like a framework for a character or a theme or a symbol, things like that. They provide an understanding of what that character or thing is supposed to do. If we hear the word caretaker, if we hear that applied to a certain character, we know, oh, there's someone who's going to be very doting on the main character or very supportive of what they do. They're going to be like a safe haven for this person. We understand their purpose in the story. We understand their motives based off of very little context clues, because we already have that understanding of them. Basically, stereotypes are more of a cookie-cutter stock character, whereas archetypes don't have to be. Because again, you can have someone who is a caretaker. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be very kind-hearted. You can have someone who's an absolute jerk, but make sure that the main character is alive and well, you know? I think we've seen that a couple times, actually. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but basically where it's like, ugh, I can't believe I have to take care of this little kid all the time, but like, make sure they're well fed and gives them a place to sleep and things like that. And like, is an actually good taker. Wait a minute! Sojiro starts out as a very, like, cantankerous old man type. And he's like, ugh, I can't believe I have to take care of the protagonist here. I have to give him a place to sleep and stuff like that. So he is the caretaker, but he's not necessarily, he's a reluctant caretaker. And in that way, he fits the archetype of caretaker, but not necessarily the stereotype of a caretaker, you know? But, like with tropes, relying on tried and true for archetypes can make characters feel stereotypical. So again, you don't want to, like, just take what you know of a character trope. You don't want to take what's known of a character type and just copy-paste it into your own works. You got to make sure that you do something interesting, but also fitting for what you're writing. You don't want to be different for the sake of being different. You want to make sure that it's like cohesive, that it makes sense for the story. But also, some archetypes can be racially stereotypical. Let's take, for example, the sage up here, right? The sage, someone who has a lot of knowledge and stuff like that. If you take someone who's like a Romani fortune teller or like an African-American medicine man, things like that, like, sure, it fits in the archetype of like someone who has a lot of knowledge and can point the hero on their journey, but at the same time, very racially charged. You don't necessarily want to like put them in that category just because it fits your story, because like, again, that falls into stereotypes. Just want to make sure that you avoid those things, that you are cognizant of those things. Obviously, I can't really give you examples for every little thing, because there's a lot out there. Basically, if you want to include a character that is of a certain race, just make sure that you do your due diligence, do your research, because that's a lot of writing, actually. There's a lot of research that goes into writing, surprisingly. It's not just making up fancy stories, it's also making sure that you know what you're talking about. But yeah, just make sure that you look into it and look into some like racial biases or stereotypes so that you can avoid them. So, we've gone over tropes, we've gone over archetypes, we've gone over cliches, and we've gone over stereotypes. What do all these things have in common? I'll give you guys a second in chat to think of an answer. Here is the thing that all tropes, cliches, archetypes, and stereotypes have in common. Repetition. The thing that they all have in common is repetition. The reason that tropes and cliches and archetypes and all of that, the reason that they are so prevalent, the fact that they're so prominent, and the fact that people know them so well, is because they are repeated often, time and again. It's a double-edged sword because the repetition makes them very familiar with your audiences. Like, we know what to expect of a Western or a mystery novel or a romance and things like that because we are familiar with all the tropes. We know what to expect. We've had it implanted into our brains time and time again. And that is what makes it so easy to subvert expectations. A lot simpler than you might expect because we know what the drills are and we know how to counteract them, how to work against them. What are some other examples of repetition then? Because repetition is a very powerful tool in a writer's toolkit. And it's kind of an extension of the trope or the archetype or the cliche. Because having something repeated over and over again, it emphasizes the point. It makes it more important, more prevalent in our heads. Another example of repetition we have is the leitmotif. You might have heard of this before. It's very, very prominent in like music theory and things like that. And it is a recurring theme throughout musical or literary composition. We're going to look at some examples of that. For those of you who have played Undertale before, we're going to listen to Asgore's theme, because Asgore's theme, this is more of the phonetic, more the musical leitmotifs. We're going to hear some different musical verses, phrases, there we go, musical phrases that are repeated throughout different iterations of Asgore's theme during his fight sequence. So first off is the game over music in Undertale. So if we listen to that. So you hear that for a second. Do. Okay. And also we heard in the middle there's that like oh. That is Asgore's voice telling us to like stay determined. So we already have in the game over music, we have Asgore telling us to like not give up hope and things like that. And when we get to his battle theme, we hear the same song just like sped up a little bit in his fight sequence. Okay, what that's supposed to do, it's supposed to connect those two things together. Because Asgore's the like penultimate fight in Undertale. So the fact that the game over music is playing while we're fighting him means that like there is a real danger of us getting a game over. There's a real danger that he is trying to end our lives. And it fits with him as a person, it fits with him as a character, and it fits the situation as well. Because we are in a fight for our lives with this person. We are also going to listen to Toriel's theme and how that's prevalent in Asgore's theme as well. So here's Toriel's fight music. So did you hear that? Do. And then we hear it in Asgore's. Right there. And that, oh my god. So that is that is amazing. The fact that you have the first boss and the second to last boss have the same music, have the same leitmotif. Like, not only does it connect Asgore and Toriel thematically, it makes you say, oh, if you didn't like realize up to that point for whatever reason, if you didn't know, oh, Asgore and Toriel, they're related. They used to be husband and wife. They were king and queen. That's what's supposed to clue you in that, oh, that's how they're connected. And they're also goat people, but like that's besides the point. You can't just assume because they're goat people, they're both whatever. Anyway, but it's also to show you just how far you've come as like you've progressed through the story. You hear that music and you think back to Toriel, who was the very first boss that you fought. And it's like, oh my god, that was so long ago. And now we're facing the same thing. And the fact that Asgore and Toriel have a lot of the same moves. And so you know sort of how to dodge them. And it's like, okay, you've put your skills to the test throughout the rest of this game. Let's see it in action, sort of thing. It is amazing. I think the next theme that is also prevalent in Asgore's is the battle music with Undyne, who is a member of the Royal Guard. It's very faint, but you could sort of catch it real quick. Okay. So, At the very end of Asgore's theme, where it's like da 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 da, if you speed that up a little bit, you hear this note progression. So da 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 da. See right there. So that is Asgore's theme. That is Asgore's theme, and that's all the leitmotifs that are present in it. Once you start hearing leitmotifs, and it's not necessarily just about like a musical phrase that's repeated, it can also be instruments. Like certain instruments can be related to a certain character. If anyone here has played Klonoa, you might know that there's like a sort of like panpipe musical instrument that is associated with Klonoa himself. And in Klonoa 2, there's a character whose name is Leorina, and she has a lot of harpsichord whenever she shows up. And that's what it's supposed to do. Like, basically, like, we hear this panpipe, or we hear this harpsichord, and it makes us think of the person. It's supposed to add an importance to whatever scene the music is playing in, where it's like, oh yeah, this is important to Klonoa or Leorina or things like that. Here's another example of leitmotif, if we're going more into the narrative, the literary, the storytelling aspect. If we take a look at Disney Pixar's Finding Nemo and look at Marlin's character arc here, he starts out saying this to Nemo when he's trying to like be his own person and separate himself from his dad's overprotectiveness. Marlin says, "You think you can do these things, but you just can't, Nemo." And that kind of tells us about Marlin's mindset, that he needs to be there to watch over his child, to do the things that Nemo can't because of like the physical damage that he got, or that he sustained as an egg. Later on, about halfway, a little over halfway through the movie, Marlin and Dory are both inside the mouth of a whale, and Dory's trying to talk to the whale, and Marlin's like, "No, you can't do that. It's not real." And Dory's like, "Yes, I can." And then he slips up and he says, "No, you can't. You think you can do these things, but you can't, Nemo." He says it again. And at that moment, he realizes, oh, hey, I've been kind of a jerk about this entire thing. I'm telling people that they can't do these things when I don't necessarily know that myself. And so he learns to trust others and let them do their thing from that. And then we get the same situation later on at the climax of the movie, where a bunch of fish are being captured by a fishing boat, and you hear that, you see that, and think, oh, it's over, these fish are dead, they're gonna be fish food, they're gonna be food for the humans. But then Dory and Nemo go swimming in, and they're like, we can save these people, we know how to. And Marlin here, you can see him, he's desperate, he doesn't want to lose his son, he just got Nemo back, and he doesn't want to lose him again. But Nemo is determined to save these, and he says, I can do this. And then you see Marlin slowly let go, and he says, you're right, I know you can. And that shows the character development of Marlin. Because he started out this guy not trusting other people, or not trusting even his own son to know how to do things, to going over here to the very end, and like finally giving him the chance to do something awesome. And then it works. And it's so, oh my god. Like, looking back at this, I did not expect to put this in. I just put this in like on a whim. I thought, oh, maybe this could fit, but I did not realize just how well this fits to like see this character development. And you see, this is where the leitmotif comes in. This situation happens time and time again, and we see these different interactions that Marlin has, and it shows his character development. And that's the importance of a leitmotif. It's not just to say that, oh, something is important, it's also to give distinction between each event, each iteration of it. This is more on the technical side of things, but here are some examples of different literary devices you can use in terms of repetition. We've got alliteration, we've got assonance, consonants, and all of these are repetitions of sounds, and that can be very important for certain things. We've got anaphora, which is the repetition of a beginning word or phrase in multiple clauses or sentences. So like, we'll fight from the trenches, we'll fight from the skies, we'll fight on... And just like that continuation of will fight is very, very important. Or epistrophe, which is the repetition of the same word or phrase at the end of multiple clauses or sentences. Like, of the people, by the people, for the people. And then we've got anadiplosis, where you start one sentence with the ending of the previous sentence. Like, time is money and money is power. That would be a pretty good, I guess, example of it. But as you can see, a lot of these examples, especially anaphora, epistrophe, and anadiplosis, a lot of those are more prevalent, I would say, in speech giving. And that's because repetition can help drive a point home. It can make it burned into your brain. If you have a story and you read it out loud and you want a certain thing to like stick in people's heads, try to repeat sounds, because that will make it a lot more important to the reader's brain or the listener's brain. Just make it important enough. Usually rules of three are very good. That will make it to where it's repeated often enough and important enough to stick in their head. But yeah, I think that is it. So, what is the biggest lesson here? Tropes and archetypes can be used as a framework for complex and interesting characters, and repetition can be useful to emphasize a point or theme or to make a person/event important, but don't go overboard and try to be original with it. That's basically all it boils down to. Repetition makes things important. It gives things emphasis. And if you want something to be emphasized, if you want to make sure that the main point of your writing is being driven home, you should use repetition. So yeah, I think actually that is all that we have to go over with this lesson. I hope you found it as interesting as I did, because, oh my god,